welcome back to Ravenheart Rendition Shop Time, and we're talking with Hendrik Varju again. How you been, Hendrik?
Good. How are you, Andrew?
Doing good.
Good.
We're getting over our heat wave and starting with shorter days and cooler nights and cooler days too yet in Wisconsin. I think Canada's doing the same thing as far as I hear.
Yeah, we had a bit of a heat wave the last 2 days, but back to kind of normal September weather today, and supposed to start getting fairly cool this weekend. So once the leaves start turning color, that's the fun part, and then everything goes gray after that.
Yeah, then it all goes gray, but white and then slowly
white
turning
and gray. Yeah. I'd rather have snow than mud, though. We usually have weeks of mud in the spring, so It's kind of nice to get a little snow on the ground.
Yep.
But we don't really have snow stay on the ground till usually December, and often we don't even have a white Christmas anymore.
Yeah, it's different than I remember. A lot more white Christmases when I was younger. Usually now our Januaries and Februaries they're the brutal ones down here.
Yeah. Now we've had some pretty easy winters. I mean, cold, but not the kind of snow we used to have. I mean, I'm not too far from Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
If you go 2 hours north of here, you'd have snow. A lot of snow all the time in December, January, February. But around here, sometimes I'd say we have a 1 in 3 chance of having a white Christmas if we're lucky, and even then it's sometimes like a half an inch.
Yeah.
Just point out the window, say, "Look, it's white."
It's white. Yeah.
Yeah, not doing any skidooing in that.
No, not really.
No.
Well, since the last time that we talked, you've released the videos, both DVDs that we kind of hinted about the other day, and I guess I'll let you kind of introduce your titles.
Okay. Yeah, I managed to get them out a little earlier this year, so it's about I think a week and a half before Labor Day. Usually it's right after. And I did 2 titles this year. The first one is just under 11 hours long, so that's one of my shorter ones. It's called Mortise and Tenon Joinery. Mm-hmm. So it's a 5-disc set that takes you through, all kinds of stuff, how to mark out, and, we can talk about all the details later. And then the second production, I decided to do one, it's called Honing and Setting Joiner and Planer Knives. And I think I've mentioned before, I do a seminar here once a year just on the topic of how to change joiner and planer knives.
Yeah.
It sounds bizarre, but it's, I call it the world's most boring seminar. But it's amazing how many people come to that seminar who say, my jointer used to work perfectly, but I tried to change my knives and the machine's never worked right since. And about, maybe a year and a half ago or a little more, I had a couple articles published in Fine Woodworking on some jigs that I invented to help me sharpen joiner knives while they're still in the cutter head, mm-hmm. and also sharpen planer knives while they're still in the cutter head. So I covered all of that as well in this video, how to, showing the jigs and sort of have all this bonus footage on how to sharpen in the cutter head. But then the rest of the video is on things like making sure that the beds are coplanar, how to set the knives from scratch, like how to take knives you got back from the sharpening service and get that set up perfectly with your outfeed bed. It's a dry subject, but it's an important one.
Oh yeah, it's important. So, and the joiner kind of starts out, you're making sure everything's square, so your dimensions and your measurements and everything is where it starts there. Yeah.
The joiner is an incredibly important machine. So that, anyways, that's a bit of a dry topic, but so that one was only a 3 DVD set, mm-hmm. just over 6 hours long. But when I did my first video in 2007, that was called Jointer and Planer Secrets, and that one covers how to use a joiner and how to use a planer, mm-hmm. as well as edge gluing. But I didn't cover things like maintenance of the machinery or knife changing or sharpening, because I thought that was, beyond the scope of a video. Especially my first video wasn't going to be a 10-hour special. But I thought it was time to come back to that, and it's one thing to learn how to use a joiner and planer, but it's another thing to learn how to maintain them and sharpen them and keep it running perfectly. So,
sure.
It's a dry topic, but there's quite a few people already saying, I enjoyed your first video on how to use it, but my machine doesn't work very well because it just isn't set up right. And now they're starting to, say, oh, gee, now you got that video out here, so I can finally change my knives after 7 or 8 years. I was just at someone's shop today and turned on their joinery, and within the first 5 seconds of using it, I knew the knives were dull as anything because it's so loud, and the wood's just getting pounded, and the wood comes out looking a bit white, and it was cherry, but it comes out looking pale. So, people just don't realize when they're dull because they, it gets dull slowly, so it's not something you pick up on if you haven't nicked the knife.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so maybe in the next show we can talk about that joiner and planer knife DVD and concentrate today on the Mortise and Tenon one.
Yeah, it sounds good. And the joiner and planer one, especially for my jointer, considering I got it used and I did a few things that I read out of a few books here and there, and it's pretty good, but there's a little bit of setup that I still need to work on. So that one will come in very handy for me.
Yeah, I mean, like all the videos I do, they're all divided into chapters, so, you might go through the video once from start to finish, but then, you can only remember so much, so then a month later you say, all right, it's finally time to change the knives, so you can just watch that one chapter where it takes you through. Like, the other thing I cover is how to take knives that a sharpening service already sharpened and make them sharper, because they frankly don't always do that great of a job.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I use sharpening services to grind the nicks out, because to me that's too much work for me to do with waterstones or anything.
Oh, geez, yeah.
But I can really improve the sharpness on some waterstones or diamond stones just before I install them. So, anyway, so it's nice that you can put these videos in again and again and just go to that one chapter that you need that day, and it's in real time, and you can literally watch it in the shop as you change your knives, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and
so,
I actually put the TV in the shop now, and it's got the old DVD player on it, so it works perfect for me.
Okay. Yeah, because I know the Mortise and Tenon one, for example. I recently, Fine Woodworking posted something about it in a blog, and did a little contest and gave away a copy of it as well.
Oh, cool.
And some of the comments from people were like, 11 hours on Mortise and Tenon Joinery? Like, how's that even possible?
Well,
I don't know if they've ever cut one or what, but there's a lot of detail if you want to learn how to do it to perfection. It's really, really involved. Right?
Well, and going through stuff. I mean, we will talk about it more, but I mean, if you really think about it, 11 hours, and you don't show one single way to do a Mortise and Tenon in 11 hours. You have your, I guess, as we were talking before the video, your favorite ways of doing it with these things. There's even more ways than is covered.
Oh, yeah.
These are the basic ways that you normally do this. And you don't cover one single way to do it even in your video. And there's other ways beyond that even too.
Exactly. So. I show a few options in case someone doesn't have a certain machine.
Mm-hmm.
But, to be honest, even if you had all the machinery in the world, other than CNC kind of stuff, even if you had enough machinery in your shop to do Mortise and Tenon 10 different ways, I guarantee you there's only 2 or 3 methods that are decent ways. Just because you can do it many ways doesn't mean that there aren't a couple of ways that are the best in terms of efficiency, safety, accuracy, and all that, right?
Sure.
So I'm always looking for methods that are relatively safe, but also get me to a high level of accuracy, because that's, to me, everything in joinery is the accuracy. And, I know a lot of people, like, one thing I don't cover in the video is I don't cover how to do your Mortise and Tenon joints by router, or with, let's say, a Lee FMT machine or things like that. And I know people that do it that way and just swear by it, and I have nothing against it. But I'll tell you, for a lot of hobbyists, routing, let's say, 1.5 inch deep mortise with a handheld router.
Yeah.
It's amazing how dangerous that can be if you don't really know what you're doing and don't know how to handle the router.
Yep.
There's one wrong move, and you got this long bit, like, totally engaged deep in the wood, and the whole router can just jump, like, in your hands. And on top of that, you got the round-ended mortises now because of the router bit shape. With the Lee FMT, that's fine, because it's quite an expensive machine, but it gives you the ability to cut the tenons with round edges too to match. So in that case, it kind of makes sense. But if you're going to do mortises by router with rounded ends and tenons by bandsaw methods or table saw methods which don't have rounded ends, now the question is, how do you make the rounded ends on the tenons to match?
Yep.
Or do you chop the ends of the mortises square, which sounds so simple to say, but believe me, it's very hard to do well.
Yep.
Like, those are the kinds of things that if you just watched it in a video, you go, oh, that looks simple, and you go try it, and you'll massacre the thing.
Yeah,
it's so difficult.
I've had that thought going, oh, well, look, that's not too bad. And then after I massacred it, I rounded off the edges on the on the tenons.
On the tenons.
That's a lot easier.
Yeah, and you know, I've read articles, lots of articles and stuff where people round the edges of the tenons. I've done it where I've had to, like with a round mortise. I've done it by using a quarter round bit to round the corners, but I can't get up to the shoulder because of the bearing on the bit in the way, right?
Yeah.
So every article I've read about how to do it basically says grab a rasp and just grind away at it, like randomly grinding away until it fits. And again, that, like, to me, that's not a very satisfying thing, because most people will not be able to rasp something in any accurate way. It's just too freehand, you know. It's just,
well, yeah, not consistent.
Like going, like going at something with a file or a rasp. You're either incredibly skilled and pulling it off, or you're totally not pulling it off, and you're just saying, who cares, close enough, jam it in, put some glue on quick before anyone sees it, you know. So,
and if they do that, they have to remember that glue doesn't fill gaps.
No.
Only epoxy. They use epoxy.
Yeah.
Which gets expensive.
Because a lot of, you know, there are people that do it completely by hand, and I can only stand back in total awe at someone who can do it that way and do it as accurately as I do it with machinery. But for the average beginner to intermediate woodworker, you'd have to do thousands of them to get anywhere near that accuracy level. And as a hobbyist, let's face it, you're going to maybe do at most a few dozen a year, if lucky. But I bet you'll do 2 projects a year that have 8 mortises each, you know? So how are you ever going to get to that skill level that some Japanese guy has, who's been doing it in Japan from the age of 13, and he's now 70, right? I mean, you're never going to get to that level. So it's not that you should just never want to try that way, like give it a try or try to develop the skill, but you want to build some real furniture and do it sometime before 2015 shows up. I mean, you have to be realistic about techniques too, you know?
Oh, sure.
So, I mean, in this video, I do use hand tools a fair bit to make the final fit, but I don't start chopping mortises directly into the wood with nothing but a chisel. It isn't the way I do it. It's not efficient. It's highly inaccurate if you're not incredibly skilled. So I show methods that work, you know? Yeah.
And I've done a few by hand, which when you're not used to it, it takes, if you want to do it accurately, it takes a long time. I'm sure there's people that do it a lot more than I do, but, you know, and if I'm doing, you know, 2, okay, you know, cut them by hand or buzz them on the drill press or something, but, you know, or drill them out, the most of it, and then, you know, chop at it by hand. But, I mean, when there's a lot of them to do, that's when I like to use the power tools. So it's the repetition, the repeatability, speed, and as you said, it's fast and safe at the same time. So Now, one thing that you cover in here is cutting mortises with the drill press mortising attachment. Now, I haven't taken the plunge of I'm still deciding if I'm taking the plunge of, do I buy a mortising attachment or do I buy a mortising machine? Now, obviously, the machine's more expensive, but there's got to be reasons that there is this mortising machine when they still make mortising attachments.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you honestly that I still have my mortising attachment for my drill press. And when I do a seminar here live on how to do mortise and tenon, I show both methods, the mortising machine and the mortising attachment. And honestly, there's no quality difference between the two. The difference is the amount of fussing I have to do to set up the attachment.
Oh, okay.
Whereas with the machine, because I've got it all set up with fences and it's just for that one task, I can just go over there and start fairly quickly.
Sure. Well, that makes
sense.
sense.
So the first thing is, if you just have a small tabletop drill press, you can't buy a mortising attachment for that, because that small of a machine just can't handle a task that difficult, because you're basically forcing a four-sided chisel into the wood under nothing but brute force. So you got to have a pretty big machine with a big long lever on it and that kind of thing. So I think you can buy a mortising attachment that will fit a drill press, like maybe a 12-inch size at the smallest, but like a floor model.
Sure.
And then a 14-inch, 15-inch, 16.5, and so on. The one I have now is a Delta 18-inch drill press, but I'm still using the mortising attachment that I've owned for something like 16 years and used to fit on another Delta 16.5-inch drill press. So when I do a seminar, the reason I show that, first of all, there's always a few people at the seminar that don't have a mortising machine, so I don't want to just show them the easy way. And to be honest, setting up a mortising attachment, there's a lot of little things that you can do wrong that will make it not work well. So, that's part of like a whole chapter in the video is how to use a mortising attachment. And I go through the setup. It's not just, hey, how you doing, everyone? It's already set up. Let me show you what to cut now. I take you through every detail. You got to turn this way and make sure this bolt's tight. And oh, look at the cheap fence on this one. It's crooked. And I attach a wooden fence in front of it with double stick tape, and I shim behind it with a couple business cards, and I show you exactly what can go wrong. But once you have that set up, the mortises are not even distinguishable from what I can do on my mortising machine.
Oh, cool.
Now, the other thing, though, is my mortising machine, when I bought it, which wasn't that long ago, maybe 9 years ago, it was about $400 up here in Canada. And you can buy the same one today for probably $260.
Oh, jeez. That's a big
$260 these days is not that much money. I mean, you can pay that for a really good cordless drill.
Yeah.
So we're not talking hundreds of dollars. I mean, you can buy bigger mortising machines that are hydraulic and have an XY table. You can spend $1,200 or $2,000 if you want, but you can also get into a little tabletop one like mine for $250. I bet you in the States it'd be like $225 because everything's cheaper there. And that's not a lot of money for something that's going to be quick and easy to use every time.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's the debate.
Like you were saying, you can spend $1,200 and more. For that, I'm thinking, you know what? I don't do that many. $250 somewhere in there. Yeah, that might save me some time and be cheap enough to say, hey, I got a spot in the shop for that.
Yeah, I bought a little Delta tabletop version, and then I bought a heavy cast iron stand that's actually made for a grinder. And then I built up like a little platform on the top of the stand to raise the height of the machine where I wanted it. And this is all in the video too. I show how I made a secondary fence at the front of the machine to trap the part between two fences while you're cutting. So, in the video I also show modifications I've made to the machine and how I sort of built a little platform around it so that it's easier to use. And, I show all the imperfections in the machine too. Say, look, there's a little error here. I had to put a piece of tape around it. I've got this shim here because the fence wasn't made 90 degrees. When you're buying a machine that costs $250, $300, they aren't perfect usually. And even when you buy the $3,000 machine, I do find faults in them too. So you have to get skilled at finding the faults and then just finding a way to shim or build your own little sub-fence or something, and you can still get amazing results, right?
Yeah. So with both of those options, and this is only half of what we're covering is just the mortises part. If you were to look for, let's first talk about the mortising attachment. Are there certain things? Because down here we have, I know Delta is one that I've seen available, and there's a company that makes a white one because Delta's is kind of like that blue-gray color they've always done.
Yeah.
And there's a white one. I can't remember the brand right now.
It might be a Jet.
I think there was a Jet one, and I think there's like a Fox Shop thing, and there's.
Oh yeah, it could be Fox Shop.
Yeah, and
for sure Grizzly would make one too.
Sure. So
Powermatic would have one.
Yep. And then, so
Yeah.
if you're looking at these different models, are there things on a mortising attachment that you should be looking for? Is there something special, like make sure you get, ABC?
Yeah. Well, one thing I see a lot is if you buy a mortising attachment made by one brand for a drill press of a different brand, they often say it will fit or should fit, but it doesn't fit correctly on the quill.
Oh, okay.
And if it's not tight up there, first of all, it can fall right off while you're mortising. But even if it doesn't fall off, you're not going to get straight cuts. So in some ways, if you can stick between the same brand or the same company for both the drill press and the mortising attachment, I find it works better.
Okay.
The other thing is if you have a smaller drill press, like a 12-inch, 14-inch, or 15-inch, they usually make the mortising attachment with the chisel holder the correct size to fit the quill of the biggest drill press, like an 18-inch or 16.5.
Okay.
And then they give you these steel collar shims to put inside the hole for the smaller models. And a lot of those don't work that well. I've had quite a few students over the years where that's what they were faced with, and it just didn't fit right. Then they took the shim collar to a machine shop and had to pay them $30-40 to try and machine it better to fit better. If you're into that kind of position where that's what's happening to you, I'd say take it back and buy a mortising machine for $250, and let's just move on here.
Which considering I have I'm very happy with my drill press. I don't have a big one, but it's a 12-inch and it's a Ryobi. It's digital readout. It's easy to set the speed. I don't have to switch belts, any of that stuff, and it does what I need it to do. But maybe I might consider the mortise machine instead. So.
Yeah, like I usually say, if you're happy with your drill press and it pretty much does what you want, buy the machine instead, because it is easier to use as well, like in terms of setup. If you have a really cheap or not so accurate drill press and you're thinking of upgrading anyway, then that would be the time to buy maybe a slightly bigger drill press, like a 16.5-inch, with the same brand mortising attachment. It fits completely without any shims inside of the chisel holder. And you're good to go.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right, because now you got a big drill press that can do lots of really deep holes and big holes and things, and you also have the attachment, which is only like $55 usually or so.
Yeah, I think I've seen them around here for about that price too.
Yeah, like what the way I see it here in Canada is they usually sell it for about $110 with 4 chisel bit combos, right? You get the chisel and the bit. However, often the chisels are not good quality.
Yeah.
I always say forget about the $110 package with the 4 supposedly free chisels, because they usually sell it without the chisels for about $55 here in Canada. So just buy it that way without the chisels, and then buy really good quality chisels and auger bits, because that's what does all the cutting. And if you have cheap bits, you'll never get a good mortise in the first place. Some of them are really, really cheap offshore stuff that just burns the wood on the first cut. It's just awful. And I've had students bring bits in like that. Like I would pay myself. I buy mine from Lee Valley. They're Japanese, and they cost me somewhere between $45 and $55 each.
That's a little different than the 50-something for all 4.
Yeah. Now for a beginner, they may not want to spend that much money and buy all 5 sizes, because you got 1/4-inch, 5/16, 3/8, 7/16, and 1/2-inch. Those are the ones that fit most benchtop machines or mortising attachments. So I usually say, if you have a project tomorrow or next week coming up where you need a 1/4-inch bit, then just buy that one, but buy a really good one.
Yeah.
And then the next project, maybe you need a 3/8, so you buy it, 6 months later. But buy them one at a time, just like good router bits. Yeah. Don't just feel like you have to have 5 all at once. Because frankly, you don't use a 7/16 or a 5/16 very often. So rather than buy 5 really cheap ones that are not worth anything and do awful work, let's just buy 1 or 2 really good ones and then expand your collection over time, right?
Yeah, and the comparison to the router bits makes complete sense to probably a lot of woodworkers, because we've all gotten the 55 bits in one thing and then realized why you don't buy that.
Yeah, it's like every bit travels in a elliptical orbit.
Yeah,
It's like a full 16 wider than stated on the bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the wood you're cutting is actually sharper than the bit you're cutting with.
Oh yeah. But you know, I can also go to a tool place and buy a chisel and auger bit combo for $13 instead of 45 or 55. But they are cheap and awful.
Mm.
And I have students bring them in and go, you know, this is what I bought, and I say, well, either you're going to return it and you're going to buy a good one, or I'm going to teach you how to sharpen this one, but I guarantee you the metal's going to fold over on the first cut. I'm not kidding. A single cut into something like hard maple or beech, a single plunge into the wood, and take the bit out and look at the edges around the chisel, and you'll see that the metal's folded right over 90 degrees, like almost like you bent it over with a wrench or something. like very, very fine. But I mean, to do that on the first cut, the steel is so cheap, it's not even going to do the job for an hour. So why would you even buy it at all?
Yeah.
And I can spend a full hour tuning up that chisel for the first time because the manufacturer didn't flatten the sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to sharpen everything. There's burrs everywhere, and then after all that effort, one mortise and the thing's dead already. It's burning. Like, well, why bother? You know?
Yeah, that generally folding metal is bad on a chisel.
You know, and then you're just spraying it with top coat, wondering why it's burning, trying to lubricate the thing. It's like if you look at it under my loupe, you can see the metal's folded. It's no longer pointy.
Yeah.
It's like a rounded surface you're trying to force into a piece of hard maple. So, you know, people, like I always tell people, put your money into your cutting tooling, like your tooling, your bits, your blades, your chisels and bandsaw blades. Put good money into that stuff, and I could do more with a really good saw blade on a cheap saw than I can do on a really high-end table saw with a cheap blade on it. Right?
Oh, I agree.
Because the blade does the cutting, so it's even more important in a way than the machine.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, you got to stay away from the cheap sets that they sell.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah, for anyone that already has a drill press that can handle a mortising attachment, and maybe you're only going to do 8 or a dozen mortises in an entire year or 6-month period, then I would say just buy the attachment and don't worry about it. And then maybe 5 years later you find you're getting into it more and you're going to do, you know, 100 mortises a year or even more. Then I'd say, you know what, maybe it's time to sell the mortising attachment and get the machine, and you're going to be thrilled because it's so much less setup every time you want to use it.
Sure, which makes sense.
But once you know how to use, the point is, once you know how to set up the mortising attachment correctly, there really is no difference in the quality of the work at all. Except I really think most people don't know how to set it up correctly because it is finicky, right?
Well, and
it's a fussy thing.
It's like anything else. I mean, you have more setup time because, you know, it's not a dedicated machine. It's not ready to go right out of, you know, you set up a mortise machine, that's the way it's set up. You shouldn't have to set it up every single time unless you're switching something for some reason, but
yeah, but I mean, when I'm talking setup for a mortising attachment, once you know how to do it, we're talking maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So we're not talking an hour here. We're talking 10 minutes of extra work just before you do 8 mortises, and you probably won't do any more for another 6 months. So it's not that big of a deal, you know.
Sure. So
get over it.
For those of us, which including me now, that I'm thinking about, hey, I don't really want to mess with this. Plus, I have a smaller drill press. What kind of features should we be looking at on a machine? Are there better things
on the mortising machine?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I've got this Delta one that I've had for a while, and it's quite good. I've also worked on the Powermatic one at other shops, and it's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
The Powermatic has a really nice feature for the hold down, where it has like a dial that allows you to fine-tune where the hold down goes and also like trap it exactly where you want it. The thing is, I don't want a hold down that holds the work down. You do a single plunge into the work, and now you have to loosen the hold down just to move sideways. I want something I can slide under, but like continuously as I'm working, but it also still has to be fairly firm, so the workpiece doesn't rise off the table when you try to pull the chisel back up. So, you know, I would suggest looking for a really good hold down on the thing, and a rack and pinion fence for sure. So you have a dial you turn to move the fence forward and back.
Mm-hmm.
And also some machines that aren't made as well, if it's a real low-end one, as you move the fence with the rack and pinion, it can start changing. Like let's say it is currently parallel to the back of your chisel, but then you suddenly have to move the fence an inch.
Mm-hmm.
It can actually not be parallel to the chisel after moving that inch, just because it's not made very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a cheap table saw fence, that every time you move it, it's no longer parallel to the miter slot, and you have to keep checking it with a tape measure.
Yeah, I had one of those.
That kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I lived with one of those for years, but you finally I got a Biesenmeyer now, and, I just lock it down and start cutting. I don't even check anymore. It's so good. So you want to look for a good rack and pinion fence that holds its settings and stays parallel no matter where you move it, and you want a good hold down. And all these smaller machines, they're only something like 1 horsepower. They're not big motors. Mm-hmm. Nice long handle. Like I know the Powermatic, the Grizzly, the General International. They have like a long handle usually with a curve on the end, whereas my Delta one's just a straight stick. Mm-hmm. But mine, I can pop the handle off to the side and rotate it to a new position within like 2 seconds. I can position it differently so that when you're done plunging, your handle is quite downward or still in a horizontal position. Whereas some of the other models, you have to actually remove a pin or a bolt to change the handle position.
Okay.
Mine just sort of pops out. It's like a spring, and then you just turn it, and it pops back in the new position.
Yeah.
So anyways, little things like that. And, the one thing I show in the video is that whether you're using a machine or a mortising attachment, I believe you have to have a front fence and a back fence.
Okay.
So in other words, the machine has a fence that you push the wood against,
yep.
But I put another fence in front of the part, tight enough that there's no play, but still loose enough I can slide the part back and forth to keep cutting, the whole row.
Oh, sure.
And without that, it's impossible, because when you force the 4-sided chisel into the wood, it's under so much pressure. Mm-hmm. It takes nothing for the part to move away from the fence, like towards you. And, no matter how strong you are, how tight you're holding on, there's no way you're going to overpower that chisel pressure.
No.
So even when I used to use only a mortising attachment, years ago I started putting a front fence in front of the part and clamping it to the drill press table with 2 C-clamps. And that totally improves the whole process, like hugely.
Cool.
So really simple stuff like that.
Well,
So, with my drill press and mortising attachment, I have to get a second fence. I have one in my cabinet, and I have to C-clamp it down. Whereas on my Delta mortising machine, I made a fence that has like knobs, like a jig with handles, so I can just tighten them down and I'm ready to go. It's that much quicker, no clamps or anything.
Sure, that makes sense.
So, but I mean, even for me doing woodworking professionally, it's not like I cut 500-600 mortises a year. I might cut 150 or I might cut 100. Mm-hmm. It's not massive numbers. So, I just decided to buy the machine one time. One project came along that had something like 60 or 70 in one project, and that's when I said, it's time to bite the bullet and buy the machine.
There you go.
Just to save me some of the hassles.
So now
anyway.
Now the other end of this joint. Now we only covered. That's why the DVD is long, because we talked how long, and we only covered part of the joint.
Right. Well, and the other thing I should mention too, just in terms of the mortising bits, is I also cover in the video how to sharpen these things.
Yes.
Because a lot of people don't know how to sharpen not only the chisel itself, but also the auger bit. I show how to do that with a little Nicholson auger bit file. It's a special file designed for it.
Yep.
Because again, like, I'm thinking in my head, okay, someone buys my video, they go buy a mortising machine, they got cheap bits and don't know how to sharpen them. Nothing's going to go right until you know how to sharpen them. So I knew I had to cover that too.
Yeah, I happen to have one of the auger bit files, mainly because I only have a 12-inch drill press. So sometimes when I have to drill really deep holes, I have an old brace and bit, and I have a set of old, I think it's Jennings auger bits. And when you buy them used, they are not sharp.
Yeah. That's why they sold them.
Yep.
Because they didn't know how to sharpen it, right?
Yeah, and I fixed them up, and those things really log off some wood.
Yeah. It reminds me, I had a student here this year in the spring, who, he came to a seminar where I was showing how to sharpen chisels, and he said, up until now, every time my chisel got dull, I just bought a new one. I was like, what? How can you buy a new chisel every time it's dull? It only takes 15 minutes to get it dull sometimes. He's like, yeah, it was getting pretty expensive.
I guess so.
Yeah. Anyway, so I have this bonus footage. Part of it is about how to sharpen the bit and the chisel, but then I'm just looking at the table of contents here. So it looks like we have the first 4 chapters covering like methods and tools, and then also covering how to mark out mortise and tenon joints.
Yes, which is
and then how to cut mortises with mortising machine and mortising attachment, separate chapters. And then of course the machine doesn't do the job completely, so there's a whole chapter on how to clean up the mortises by hand with chisels, which I always do. The machine is not 100%. And then we launch it. Sorry?
It does the bulk of the work, though.
Yeah, for sure. It does like 98% of the work. It's a lot, but it's not perfect because you've got a round auger bit inside of a square chisel, so they can't overlap physically in the corners, right? So by doing lots of overlapping cuts after cutting the mortise, you can get almost perfection between the ends, but at the very end, the 2 ends of the mortise, you can't have perfection there from the machine. So we have to go in with some hand tools, like some chisels and a mallet, and chop the corners out. But we're literally only cutting about a 1/16 deep just to clean up. So it's really a pretty fast process. So anyways, then we finally get to what is it here, about chapter 6, and that's where I start getting into how to do tenons, and I start with the shoulder cuts. That's how I think most people start by cutting the shoulders, not the cheeks. So for that method, for cutting shoulders, I personally feel that the table saw is the best way to do it, and that's how I teach it in the video. And I go in, I'm just using a normal miter gauge on a table saw, but I'm showing a pretty unique way to set up a stop block to set the positioning of the shoulder, using something I call a single point fence. So it's like just a piece of wood with a round end on it, and you just put the end of the tenon against that piece of wood, clamp the part to your miter gauge, and then you do your cut. And of course you've got shoulders on the wide faces of the cheeks, and then you also have shoulders on the edges of the cheeks, which may be different depths. So you have some blade height changes to do between the two.
Oh, sure.
All right, so one of the things with this kind of work is usually you're not cutting one joint, you're cutting 8 or 12 identical joints. So you have to get in the mentality of working in batches, So you set up the machine and you cut all the face cheeks on all 8 joints, and then you change the blade height, but don't change your stop block because the shoulder position's the same, and you now cut all the edge cheeks on all of them. And every time you finish a set, before I ever move anything on the setup, I'm always double checking that I cut every single one, because it's so hard to get the machine exactly the same way again if you missed one.
Oh, yeah. It'll be close, but not quite.
Yeah. And I mean, if you've ever had to draw a line around the board on all 4 faces and have it end up in the same spot on the last corner, like, that's way harder to do than it sounds. Because it has to have perfection with your squares, and your pencil has to be sharp at all times, and it's even harder to cut around the piece of wood and end up in the same place on the 4th corner, which is exactly what you're trying to do when you cut shoulders, right? But the methods I use on the table saw, honestly, I could not improve it with a hand plane. Like, anything you try to do with a shoulder plane is going to only make it worse than it was off the machine, because I really can get it within 2 to 3 thou max error. It's really good. But then the cheeks, that's a different story. I cut the tenons a little fat, and then I use a shoulder plane to trim the cheeks to get the perfect fit. That's the way attack tenon. So the tenons actually involve a fair bit more handwork than I need to do on the mortises.
Mm-hmm. And the method that you're talking about cutting them a little thick, you're not the first person that I've heard that thinks that's a good idea either.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you cut them too thin, then it's too late, right?
Yeah.
You got to do a repair now.
Yeah, a lot harder to put it on than take it off.
Yeah. I mean, when I say cut them, like in the video too, I do use a dial indicator a lot, like a dial caliper, to measure these things as I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal off the machine is to have it too fat by maybe somewhere around 4 or 5 thou.
Mm-hmm.
And each time I pair the face of the cheek with a shoulder plane, I'm taking off, let's say, roughly 1.5 thou.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm only trimming each face maybe twice each, and it now fits.
Yep.
But what I find is if you get a tenon a little fat, and then you decide to use something like a tenoning jig and try to dial the part over just a couple thou and trim again, the blade will actually flex.
Mm-hmm.
If you try to just shave wood, because it's loaded with a lot of pressure on the wood side and there's no pressure on the other side, it actually bends.
Mm-hmm.
And the more thin kerf the blade is, the worse it is. So you end up with the tenon sloppy at the tip of it, like already cut too small, but then getting tight 3/4 of the way in. And in your mind, oh, it doesn't fit all the way, I better trim even more off on the table saw. When you do that, you only have maybe 20% of the tenon actually glued properly, and the other 80% towards the tip is not even touching.
Mm-hmm.
And wood glue can't bridge a gap like ordinary PVA type glue.
No.
Can't bridge a gap like epoxy can.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing I show in the video is I show some sample joints that I've actually cut open and show you what it looks like inside, to show you what a good quality joint's supposed to look like. And I encourage people when they try to learn these techniques, like if someone buys my video and they've never had success with mortise and tenons, I don't recommend your first set is for a real project.
No.
I recommend you mill up some parts and you do 3 or 4 joints as samples. And then when you are done and you've glued them, I want you to go to the bandsaw the next day and I want you to cut them open and see what's going on inside, because that's the only way to prove if you did it right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's when someone shows me a mortise and tenon joint that's already closed and it's not through or anything, I have no clue if they did it well or not. How do I know?
Yeah.
All I see is the shoulders are touching, so that's good. But the rest, I don't know what they've done inside.
Mm-hmm.
So, cutting these things open. What's that?
The only way to know is if it fails.
Exactly. Like I know I've had a few students in the past that, frankly, kind of looked down on me for doing these joints with machines at all. Because they had taken so many hand tool courses elsewhere and felt like, it's you're the Antichrist if you do it with a machine kind of thing. And I said, well, that's fine. That's a different opinion. It's not one I share. But then at a future lesson, they're talking to me about how they're working on these mortise and tenons at home by hand. And I say, do you mind bringing one in, like before you've glued it? I want to see it. Mm-hmm. And they bring it in, and it's so sloppy. It's not right. Like it's not going to hold right. So the fact that it's done by hand doesn't mean anything to me if it's not done right.
Oh, sure. Right? That's the way. Either way, like you were saying, if you have your blade flexing and it's fatter in the middle than the top and the bottom, and all these different things, machine or hand, if it's not done right, it's not right.
Yeah, I mean, if you're capable of doing it perfectly by hand or by machine, and you choose by hand because you love doing it that way, I have nothing wrong with that, of course. It's a wonderful thing. But the truth is that most people can't do it well by hand until they've done probably several thousand of them, which almost no hobbyist ever does. So that's why I do it by machine. I mean, I'm running a business. I have to be reasonably efficient, and then that's how I teach people to do it as well. And if they say, well, I'd like to learn to do it fully by hand, more power to you. But frankly, that's like a very, very steep learning curve. It's insanely steep, So, but the one thing is you can't have a sloppy joint and just put a bunch of glue in, clamp it closed, and then show people the wonderful joint. I want to see how tight it really was before it got closed. And if it isn't tight, then it's not done properly, right? Then on the other hand, I also restore antiques, and I see through mortise and tenons done on antiques that were incredibly poorly made, like really not great, but they're pegged or they're wedged, and they are still holding 200 years later. Yeah. So, we sort of have very high standards these days because of a lot of publications we read, and there's so much information now out there on the internet. We all expect perfection, and yet 200 years ago, some of the joints were actually not very well made, but still held because of mechanical strength of wedging and other things like that, right?
Which any that I've done by hand, they got pegged.
They got pegged, yeah. Well, like in the last chapter of the Mortise and Tenon Joinery DVD set, it's a chapter called Through Wedged Mortise and Tenon Joints, and I go through one entire through wedged mortise and tenon, including how to make the wedges, how to bandsaw the curves in the tenon. I do the two ends of the mortise have to be angled, like 8-degree angled with a chisel, like completely by hand. Except there's, a block of wood cut to 8 degrees on the table saw, which acts as a guide, so it's not totally freehand. But anyways, that one chapter, I think, is something like 2 hours long, which is like your average 2 DVDs out there for sure, right? At least. But that's a fairly complex joint, and I take the person through it in real time. So, that's the kind of work we all want to aspire to, and it involves more handwork still. But to me, that's a little advanced. I wouldn't want a total beginner attacking that when they haven't even gotten the simple mortise and tenon perfect yet. I mean, you got to do 100 or so before you even start to get remotely skilled at it. So, one step at a time. So that chapter 13 is the last chapter. I expect that to be of interest to people who've already done quite a few, or it's something that someone who's just learning might not even want to tackle that kind of stuff for another couple of years. Like, could go back to the video 2 years later and then tackle it, because you got to get the basics down first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we went through some of the setup and some of the mortise part of it, and then we're cutting the shoulders. And you have several ways that you talk about cutting the cheeks on these, though.
Yeah, the cheeks in particular. Like my favorite method for sure, and I make that clear in the video, is using a tenoning jig on the table saw. Okay, it's again, we're talking about maybe $120, $130 jig, but it's incredibly accurate, and I've used that jig to do many other things other than tenons. Like, you can use it to do bridle joints, flap joints. The fences also adjust to other angles, like 45 degrees. So you can do some weird, like, compound angle joinery. To me, it's well worth the money. Now, occasionally I have a part that's too tall to stand vertically on my table saw without hitting the ceiling.
Oh, sure.
Or even if you had a higher ceiling than I have, there's only so tall of a board that you're going to safely clamp to a little tenoning jig way down on the saw.
Yep.
So in that case, you have to cut. Well, the way I do it mainly is cutting with the part laying horizontally on the saw, and now you're using a dado set to chew away the cheeks. So I show that method as well as the tenoning jig, and then I also show a bandsaw method, because some people may prefer the bandsaw.
And I haven't seen the bandsaw method before. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, and I show how, like, you can slip a couple of pieces of paper or business cards between the fence and the part to shave a little more off without having to move the fence, because it's when you get really close to the final fit, it's hard to move a fence 2 thou or 3 thou, but I can put a 3 thou piece of paper in, no problem.
Sure.
So, anyways, I find the bandsaw is a much more pleasurable way to do it, just because it's a lot quieter than the table saw. But it definitely leaves a rougher cheek that needs a little more handwork than the table saw. The table saw blade is way cleaner.
Oh, which makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I mean, even when you have to cut with a dado set with the part laying flat, that's also fairly clean, but not as clean as a tenoning jig, because when you're cutting with a dado set, you're cutting cross grain. So first of all, it's a bit rougher, and then you also have the deeper lines for the outer cutters of the blade set, the dado set. So you also have a whole series of lines everywhere. Now those lines, represent such a small surface area, like for gluing. I don't consider that a problem. But when you cut them with a tenoning jig, they're way smoother because I use a rip blade. Like, you got to remember, when you're cutting a shoulder, you're using a cross-cut blade because you're cross-cutting.
Mm-hmm.
But when the part's standing vertically and you're cutting cheeks, you're actually ripping.
Yep.
That's the same as a rip cut. So you need to switch to, like, I use a 24-tooth rip blade or a 30-tooth. If you use an 80-tooth cross-cut blade, it's going to burn the wood like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to remember to switch blades between the shoulders and the cheeks on the table saw. So anyways, I prefer the table saw because I find I get better results that are more accurate, and there's a little less handwork. And clearly bandsaw blades flex even worse than table saw blades if you're trying to just shave.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I've got a big 16 HD Laguna bandsaw, and I can put my Resaw King blade on there. That thing cuts really nicely.
Mm-hmm.
But for people that own like a 14-inch bandsaw with a 3 TPI half-inch blade at the biggest, usually,
mm-hmm.
Maybe 5/8 or 3/4, but usually half-inch is where most people top out.
Mm-hmm.
Those blades are going to bend a lot worse than the table saw blade.
Oh, sure.
So, anyways, but I give a couple, 3 different ways of cutting the cheeks, and of course there's still a fair bit of chisel work and a fair bit of hand plane work on the cheeks. So the video covers machines to get you 95% of the way there, and then shows you how to use hand tools to get you the rest of the way there.
Yeah.
And the hand tools are, there's at least probably an hour at least in the DVD just focusing on how to use shoulder planes and other hand planes and chisels to refine these joints, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's easy for me to say, well, here's this nice Veritas shoulder plane I have, and look at how easy it is. But then I think back to when I didn't have that plane, and I used to do it the hard way, either using just chisels or using a block plane and chisels, and I explain why they don't work as well, but how they can still work if you know how. And I show all of that too, so that the person who can't afford a shoulder plane right away can still do this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you still have to have at least a basic plane, like a block plane, and some chisels, and hopefully you know how to sharpen them as well, right? Because they have to be sharp.
Yeah, any chisels, the mortising chisels, or just hand planes, or the stuff that attaches to these machines we were talking about earlier. They got to be sharp. They're not even safe when they're not.
Yeah, and like for example, I cut what I call the edge cheeks, so the cheeks on the edges of the board.
Mm-hmm.
I often do cut those on the bandsaw, even though I generally prefer the table saw,
mm-hmm. because
the part is often so wide that it won't fit in the tenon jig properly. So I can't even do it on the table saw sometimes.
Oh, sure.
Because of the way it clamps in, there's not enough space between the clamp and the fence on the jig. So when I cut it on the bandsaw, I leave them a little fat. And those surfaces on the edge cheeks are so small, I can't actually use a shoulder plane very effectively because you're going cross-grain.
Yeah.
Maybe the tenon's only half-inch wide or 3/4. So it's kind of like your plane just wants to keep going in a curve, like convex, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for those, I actually do it completely by chisel to trim them.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, you want to work from the end of the board towards the shoulder. But if you cut from the end to the shoulder on one edge and it cuts beautifully, I guarantee you it will tear it on the opposite one. Because when you joint or use a planer, the board goes through the planer, cuts with the grain, and then you flip it end over end to do the opposite face, which means you're always cutting in opposite directions on opposite faces. So because the chisel can only cut from the end grain to the shoulder, not the other way, it means you're always cutting against the grain on one of the two edges. So I kind of show, look like close up with the camera, look at the grain here. If I trim this one, it's going to tear like crazy. Like the chisel will just bury itself in deep. Whereas if I do this edge instead, it's going to be clean. So we might have a choice as to which one to trim with the chisel to get it to fit without getting into any tear out, right?
Sure.
So there's still a fair bit of hand plane or hand tool use and analysis in the whole thing, right?
Yeah, which they're always fun to play with.
Yeah, and then there's another chapter 11, is just purely on what I call final fitting and gluing. So that's where I take joints that have been cut fully by machine, but nothing else, and then I go through all the chiseling, the hand planing, how to know when it fits right, and how to test it, how to start closing the joint with a mallet, then realize it's too tight, pull it apart, trim some more, put a little pencil on the cheeks so you can see where you're trimming with the shoulder plane, and then I show you what a proper fitting joint looks like, and then I show you how to glue the thing, in real time. Here's where you put the glue. Here's how much glue to put on. Here's how to clamp it properly. It covers the whole thing in pretty good detail.
Cool.
So, anyways, as always, you want to watch these things in small installments. Otherwise, you either go insane or your spouse doesn't want to be anywhere near you while you watch it. That's for sure.
If you need time alone, then you put that on, and then they leave you alone too.
And they leave, but usually to go shopping. That's the only problem. The number of people I've gone to their shops. Let's assume it's a male student, because they often are. Their wives just almost like hate me, because they're like, oh my God, every time my husband puts that video in again, and there you are again, I'm just like, I need to get out of here. I'm not hanging around and listening to that nonsense.
And now you're here.
Yeah, exactly. Now you're here staying with us for a few days. Not good.
Well, speaking of some stuff that you're doing outside of the shop, you got a few things coming up here too.
Yeah, I have the Woodstock Wood Show. I'm just looking for my calendar. I don't know where I put it. It's on the weekend of October, I think 4th, 5th, and 6th. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever those dates are.
Sure.
First weekend in October, and this is a small town about an hour and 15 minutes from where I am, or about a little under 2 hours from Toronto. And wood shows these days are not as big as they used to be, but I know 15 years ago the Woodstock show was considered one of the best and biggest in the country, even though it's a small town. But it's a great show where you have kind of a country feel, like it's out in a small venue, like out where they have a racetrack, like a horse track.
Oh, cool. And
they have different buildings. So you have one building with people selling actual furniture. You'll have Amish people and Mennonites selling furniture and stuff. And you'll have a building with crafts and like woodworking competition stuff. And then they'll have a building just with machinery and tools, and they have seminar areas and stuff like that. So anyways, they've hired me just to do one seminar on the Saturday. So I'm only there on Saturday. I think it's October 5th.
Yep, I just checked.
Is that what it is? Okay. And I'm doing a seminar, I think 1:30, 2 o'clock. But anyways, anyone interested in it who lives somewhere remotely near here, they can go to, just Google Woodstock Wood Show, and you'll find it immediately. And it's I think there's only 2 shows left in Ontario, actually.
Oh, wow.
Because a couple closed down last year. So, they're trying to, now that there are less shows, I think that's going to make the remaining ones better attended even.
Oh, sure.
And they seem to have a good list of vendors that have committed to it this year, like more than last year. So they're hoping to generate some interest. So
cool.
Anyways, so I'm doing a seminar on template routing. So it's going to be about how to make templates for curved furniture parts, and how to make the template, how to make the part, how to use your. At the show they're not going to have a bandsaw for me, so I'm going to show how to do it with a jigsaw and handheld routing.
Oh, cool.
And talk a fair bit about routing and router safety and what kinds of bits to use for that kind of work. So.
Oh, interesting. Well,
anyway.
I wish I was
anyone. It's a little far for you, but I would say people would come to that from Toronto for sure, and then some people might even come out from as far as Windsor, like near Detroit.
Oh, cool.
That sort of general area, or Niagara Falls, Hamilton, down Niagara way. So
sure.
It's a good little show. 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think I forget, $10 or something for the whole weekend pass. So. Like for entry. So once you're in, you've got all these different free seminars to watch, and equipment and lumber sales and all that kind of stuff. So
well, it sounds similar to the they call them the woodworking or the wood shows. In
around the country. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Like this is just an individual show. I know that it used to be a family that ran it for, I don't know, 25, 30 years or something.
Oh, wow.
And they sold the show last year to the Agricultural Society in that town. And because I've never been hired to do seminars at that show, but this year they contacted me in the spring and said we want to generate a little more interest, get some more seminars going, try to make it more than just somewhere to go buy tools, like try to get some educational stuff going.
Yeah, it seems to be a lot of the shows that are left are leaning that way, and it's good to see.
Yeah, because I mean, if it's just paying to get in the door to look at stuff, then people, they're walking around with their cell phones, price comparing on the internet as they walk around, and if they can get it for $5 cheaper somewhere, they don't buy it.
Yeah.
So, it's got to be more than just selling tools. We've got to get people talking to each other, learning new techniques. Once you learn new techniques, you generally find you need a new tool anyway, so you're going to go buy it. But there's got to be a little more to it rather than just come look at these machines and buy stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
a little more exciting.
Oh, so, that's an interesting thing. I hope that keeps going.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes this year.
Yeah, and on the non-woodworking related side, I think if I remember right, you said something about your cooking side of things is doing a little something too. Yeah.
Well, I've been doing a little more with a grocery chain here called the Superstore, and I'm doing some cooking for them. But I've actually got the opportunity to do some seminars for another chain as well called Longo's, and I'm doing 6 cooking seminars at 6 different stores this fall. So the first one is next week already, and it's the same seminar at all 6 stores this fall. It's called A Trip to Hungary. And hopefully you're hungry when you arrive. And yeah, it's basically a seminar. I have 2 hours of prep before it starts, and then it's a 2-hour long seminar where, between about 12 and 20 people come. And in that 2 hours, I'm going to cook an entire meal. Everyone's going to have a full meal, including a home-baked dessert, like a dough pastry kind of thing I'm making. And it's all Hungarian food, and yeah, I've been to a few of them to watch, actually, before I even took it on, like, to do it. They wanted me to see how it's done at their place. And, to be honest, I think some of the people who attend maybe want to learn some techniques and things, but for the most part, they just want a good night out,
and
like they want a nice meal, and they often come husband and wife or girlfriend and boyfriend, like dating, whatever. And they're there to be entertained, smell the food, eat a nice meal. It's not that expensive, and everyone has a full meal. So it's sort of half entertainment and half actually interested in how to cook, right?
Well, plus it gets the name out
there. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll do this Hungarian thing for six times in different stores, and then we'll see what happens next spring for another series or whatever, because I like to do the Mexican thing too.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
So anyway, so it'll be fun.
Yeah. No, I wish I was closer again, because now you're making me hungry.
Yeah. We're gonna have some Wiener Schnitzel. Actually, they don't often do a hands-on type seminar, but I decided I wanted at least the Wiener Schnitzel. I want each person to come up and pound their own veal, like with the meat tenderizer, get it really thin.
Oh, cool.
Put it in the flour, the egg, the breadcrumbs, and then fry it themselves. Like each person will be able to do that, and then they can go back to their seat and eat, everything at that time, and then we'll serve the dessert just before they leave. So
that's kind of fun. They get to put in their own thing too.
Yeah, just it's tricky because of food safety kind of stuff. We have to, everyone has to wash their hands, and then they'll do their meat, then they have to wash their hands again because they just touched raw meat. So. Logistically, I don't think they like doing too much hands-on stuff for these things, but just for that one thing to do the meat, it's only going to be 5 minutes per person just to get their hands dirty. So, because there's a bit of an art to making a good Wiener Schnitzel.
I just know
there's some that are good and some that aren't. So. You'll eat it either way, right?
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I know my mother used to make it when I was a kid, and it was never as good as we would have at a Hungarian restaurant. Just because they fry it in a lot of oil, like it's basically floating, like you're deep frying, right? and obviously it's slightly less healthy, but it's incredibly crispy and crunchy, and there's like air pockets under the breading, so it's like separated off the meat inside, and it's just, you can't describe the texture is so good. And it took me a long time to figure out how to get it from the way my mother made it to the way it was at a restaurant, but I figured it out. So I want to show everyone the tricks to get it that tasty.
Cool. Now you're making me hungry again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
so lots to keep me busy.
Yeah, and we had talked before we started recording today, and we were talking about the Mortise and Tenon Joinery DVD, and one of the listeners would have a chance at winning one of these. Yeah.
So you figure out how you want to choose that, whether you're going to ask people to post comments or whatever.
Yeah.
And you let me know who the winner is, and I'll just ship it out directly.
Yep. Well, I will post it in the on the description when I do this video, and if anybody is still listening to this part, if you make a comment on this post, you will be entered to win a copy of it. And then next time, between now and next time Hendrik and I talk, and hopefully next time will be about the excuse me, the honing and setting joinery and planer knives video. Between now and then, we'll get you the information, and then you'll be able to enter it on Hendrik's site, which is passionforwood.com.
Yeah.
And that's that. So if they make a comment, they're entered to win. So we'll get this posted sometime. Actually, we're recording today on the 12th of September, and within the next couple of days, that'll be posted, and they'll have a few weeks to enter. So.
Good. Yeah. Cool. So whoever once they're notified they've won, all they have to do is go to my DVD page, fill out the order form with that DVD checked off, and they just have to write on the bottom in the comment section, Ravenheart contest winner or something, and then I'll just ship it straight to their address.
Yep, and we'll get them the code to enter with that, and then the code, as long as the code matches, then you know that's the person that won.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't everybody try that either.
Because there's so many people in the world just dying to use the tenoning jig or something.
Well, for free they might do it, but
they might.
So, well, hey Hendrik, you've made me pretty hungry, and and I've got to watch that joiner one too, because I need some help on my joiner. So next time I might be asking more questions about that one.
Yeah, that one's pretty technical. So if you get a chance to watch some of the techniques for installing knives accurately and honing in the cutter head, that's something amazing. That's saving people a lot of time once they've learned how to do it. So it's really neat stuff.
Sounds great. Well,
okay, so I'll talk to you again whenever next month, I guess, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks again, Hendrik.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.